Well, denial is one of those words that you'll hear a lot in recovery, and sometimes it can be confusing to know what does that mean for me, and am I in denial? Is it something that I need to pay attention to, and why is it important to lean into and pay attention to the things that we may have been denying? What's the cost of that? And how does that lengthen our pain and keep us from walking in that newness of life that the Scriptures promise for us? Today, we're going to lean in and dissect that word denial again a little bit clearer today as I bring a brother in Christ, Eric, into the conversation. Today, we're talking about denial. Welcome to Hope and Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast that helps us to lean into our hurts, hangups, and habits so we can have mental, spiritual, emotional, and relational health as we do as Jesus calls us to in Matthew chapter 5 through the Celebrate Recovery principles to be blessed and happy when we can lean into these spaces and allow Jesus Christ, our true higher power, to help us to walk in that freedom, that newness, that everlasting life as He died for us to experience in our life. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. And my name is Rodney. I'm the pastor and ministry leader of Fellowship Bible Church Celebrate Recovery here in Rogers. And it's so good to be here with you this morning. Hey, thanks for sharing this podcast. I'm loving hearing people coming to Celebrate Recovery that first heard the podcast. And that's such a blessing. And that doesn't happen without you helping us get the word out. So if you'd be so kind to give us a high rating and even a review and share this on your platforms, that would be very, very helpful. So, hey, I'm excited about today's conversation. I've got a dear brother in Christ, Eric. He's one of our coaches, our training coaches here in Fellowship Rogers, Celebrate Recovery, and but also just a dear brother in Christ, and does teachings on Friday nights and recently taught on this lesson, denial. And I asked him to come in to have a extended conversation on this. So Eric, welcome. So glad you're here, brother.
Thanks, Rodney. I'm so glad to be here. I am a grateful follower of Jesus Christ. I struggle with lust, pornography, the painful hurt of divorce, and overeating. And my name is Eric.
Hey, Eric. Well, man, thanks for jumping on here. As I mentioned in the intro, you taught on this, and sometimes I can relate to this, that we have a limited time to unpack this, and we kind of teach it like we're going to come back to it anyway because we trust that the next person coming in is going to kind of continue the conversation. But I thought it'd be good as you're kind of looking at your notes and some things that, man, I wish I'd have had time to go a little bit clear on this, to have this conversation here today with you. And so I always love the insight and the personal story that you bring into these conversations. But Eric, so can you give us a snapshot of when we talk about one of those letters in the acrostic? We talk about the cost of denial, right? And one of those is lengthens our pain. How did staying in denial, well, maybe we start here. How would you define denial, Eric? What is denial to Eric?
Well, I'm so glad that you decided to start with a definition. That always helps me to focus whenever I'm talking about anything is to really, what are we talking about? And sometimes I get to the dictionary. And of course, I come from the generation where we actually used physical dictionaries, and we don't do that anymore. We just get on the internet and look it up. But I looked up Webster's definition of denial, and it's the act of refusing to admit the truth or reality of something. And I love that definition. Sometimes they don't get it right, but this one I think they nailed right on the head because it's an act. I'm actually choosing not to believe the truth or reality of something. I'm just turning my back and choosing to ignore it. And of course, in my teach, I use the example of working with children or playing with children, and I call it peekaboo recovery, where I actually cover my eyes, my spiritual eyes, and don't look at something that's staring me right in the face. I'm just ignoring it. So it's the act of refusing to admit the truth or reality of something. So for me, that's a really good definition because I literally ignored my pornography for a couple decades. I mean, for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, for our listeners, maybe there's someone listening that they're not familiar with the principles. Principle one of Celebrate Recovery, that stems from the Beatitudes. And Jesus is telling us, blessed or happy in spite of your circumstances are you when you do these things, when you follow these truths. And the principle that comes out of the Beatitudes for Celebrate Recovery is principle one: realize I'm not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing, and that my life is unmanageable. And the beatitude that goes with that is in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. And I love step one. We admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. In the Romans 7:18, for I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. It is a little bit humbling, isn't it, Eric, when we come to that space of realizing that our ignoring and denying and acting like it's not there hasn't been working for us, that as that principle reads, that our life has become unmanageable. But what's the cost when we don't face that? I mean, that when we don't acknowledge that our life is unmanageable and that we're powerless, what's the cost for Eric in his life in denying that truth?
Well, I think there are several costs, and I think that denial acrostic, disabling our feelings, making us numb, and the energy drain and the amount of energy that I use to keep that secret. And I know in my own life, recently my mom had a stroke, and I have been spending so much time in my mind thinking about potential problems. And my wife and I are having to be involved in my parents' care now. They're their everyday living. My dad's not a good cook, and we have to cook dinner and do all kinds of things. But it is exhausting. And I find myself going to bed earlier than I normally do because I'm focusing all my attention on my mom. And that's what I did with my addiction. My denial is I tried to hide that from my first wife. I remember calling the Minirth Meyer Clinic in Dallas and saying, hey, I need some help. And they said, well, you need to come to a group. And I said, I can't do that because my wife will know and she'll leave me. And they said, well, unfortunately, that's the first step. That's what you've got to do. You're going to have to admit you got a problem and come forward. And so I hid that. And because I hid that, I had guilt, I had shame. My identity was tied up into that, and it just it ruined years of my life trying to hide that. And it was not until it was exposed that I actually started dealing with it.
Yeah. It feels like because it's painful, we kind of have to acknowledge the weight of that, acting like this is going to be easy, just face it. And that's the first step. And it is extremely difficult to do that, isn't it? I mean, it's to finally face that. It's just good to be honest with that it is painful. But as we talk about, reality is just what is, but pain is what happens when we bump into reality. When we come to that place, it is painful, but it feels like, just being on the other side of this, that pain is worth it. And it feels weird to say that pain is worth it, doesn't it? But how is that pain, when we talk about lengthening the pain and yet facing this is painful, how is that pain different for Eric?
So let me make sure I understand the question. You're asking, how is the pain different than good pain that causes good things to happen? Or
we know it's not easy. This is not easy to do this. Like, just face it. Get out of denial. Everything will be great. No, it is painful. Let's be honest. This is a painful process. But when we talk about lengthening the pain, there can be maybe a misunderstanding that, oh, well, it's not going to be painful anymore. Maybe I'll just face my denial and it won't be painful. How is that pain different? And is it painful? Maybe it wasn't painful. I don't want to assume that. But how is that pain different for Eric in your recovery journey?
Yeah, so the way I understand the lengthens the pain is that I stayed in misery. And of course, one of our themes at Celebrate Recovery is that, that misery is optional, that pain is inevitable, misery is optional. And I chose to stay in misery because I was unwilling to expose my secret. I was unwilling to expose the pornography. Mm-hmm. And until I was willing to expose that, I couldn't start really getting healing. I was stuck in this pattern. And, we just had Groundhog Day and that movie where, Bill Murray is just in that same day over and over again. And that was me. I would white knuckle it, have some success, like a week or 2 weeks, or maybe even a month of sobriety. And then I would fail and I would say, okay, I did something wrong. How can I fix this? And I would, in my own power, try to, get sobriety and fix things myself. And then, I'd have the guilt or the shame. It's kind of that cycle that you have drawn so many times, the cycle of recovery. And I would go through that. And I just was stuck in that same pattern, that insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. But I kept expecting different results. So that lengthened the amount of pain. So if I just would have admitted it, and when I finally did admit it and finally allowed God into that area of my life, I started receiving healing. And as a fringe benefit was sobriety. I had sobriety as letting God into that area of my life. So it lengthened. I had 16 years from the time it was exposed to the time that I exposed it in my own life and started seeking healing. So it lengthened my pain. If I had done that back then, I wouldn't have had all those years of going through that cycle of insanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of just the thought, it's kind of the difference between acute and chronic pain. And that's what I want our listeners to hear is that this is painful to go through the process. It doesn't mean that there's no more pain in your life. It's a different kind of pain, though. If we go to the gym, let's say we're having back problems, we're having our neck hurts all the time, our feet, our legs, all these things. The chronic pain is our muscles need strengthening, and so the physical therapy is often something that we'll refer to is it's a way to strengthen our muscles, but it is hard to get out of that bed right out of surgery, and I think your mom's going through that a little bit too, right? So it's painful. But the cost of staying in the bed and not moving is much, much greater. So it's the difference between acute, this hurts, but it's moving me forward. It's helping me in the growth process. Chronic means I stay stuck in there. So yeah, I just wanted to get clear on that lengthens the pain. It doesn't mean because we face it that we no longer have pain. It's just a different kind of pain, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a healing kind of pain. And, I've been in athletics most of my life. I've run a few marathons, and in the beginning, it's so hard. But it helps me to know that if I keep working it, as we say in recovery, that I'm going to experience growth and I'm going to experience health from doing it. It hurts while I'm doing it, but there's good stuff coming.
That's so good. Well, Eric, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to take a quick break there, and when we come back, I'm going to finish this conversation with Eric. Just love his insight and his wisdom in this space. So when we come back, I want to kind of turn the corner and just kind of get practical of what that looked like to find healing in the pain and what that looked like in Eric's life. So stick with us. We'll be right back and continue the conversation. Hey friends, if you're looking for a meeting, please don't face this pain that you may be going through right now. It's overwhelming, but it's not intended to be faced alone. Will you consider joining us on one of our campuses? Fellowship Fayetteville, Celebrate Recovery. Fellowship Rogers, Celebrate Recovery. 6 p.m., Connection Cafe meal, and then 7 p.m. our main meeting starts. We'd love for you to join us. If you'd like more information, just go to fellowshipcr.org to learn how you can start your journey with us. Hope to see you this Friday night. Welcome back. Talking with Eric, one of our trusted leaders, and has a lot of insight and a lot of years recovery. Eric, how long have you been in recovery now?
So this September will be 14 years.
Nice. I love that, man. Well, and that's a journey, isn't it? I always tell people that you can't get to 14 years without day one. And just thinking about, and I remember your day one of the journey. I don't remember everyone's, but just, God will bring people to mind in certain scenarios. And you and I have shared a lot of memories together in groups and such. But man, what was the difference, and how did day one, you were in lengthened pain and you jumped into the process? What were some of the things that you practiced, just to get real practical for our listeners, that helped you to fully embrace this process as you leaned into? Because it's not a one and done, face it and now we're good, is it? I mean, it's what was the process for Eric that helped you to stay in it and keep from putting that mask right back up?
Yeah, so I like the fact that you said that, 14 years, but there's a beginning. There's always a start. And in order to take step number 5, I've got to take step number 1. And my first step was to step out of denial, realize that I had a problem that I could not fix on my own. And for me, in my life, it started with my ex-wife texting me saying my daughter was missing, and there was a whole lot of events that happened. My daughter got involved in recovery. I started seeing her get some healing, and I was even asked to lead because I was a leader. I was leading people, but I still had this secret, this problem. But I was asked to lead, and I finally just said, I can't do this. I've got my own problem I need to deal with first. And it's interesting. I'm gonna veer off just a minute. I talked to a guy last week about his life change story, about his testimony, and he was telling me his testimony, and he has given me permission to share this. But he said, Eric, he goes, I was on a sleeping bag in a vacant house. He goes, I was I was collecting drug debts, people that took drugs but didn't pay for them. They owed money to the drug dealer. And he goes, I was for lack of a better word, a bouncer. He would go in and he would threaten them, and he would collect money. And as he went back to his drug dealer, he got to keep half of whatever he collected. And that's how he got money. But he spent all of that money on his own addiction of drugs. And he said, and it was really interesting, he said, God protected me. And he goes, you know what? He goes, God had a plan for my life, but I had a problem. And I love that sentence right there. God had a plan for my life, but I had a problem. Let me get back. God had a plan for my life. That Jeremiah 29:11, he had a plan to prosper me, but I could not move forward in that plan till I realized I had a problem. I needed to step out of denial and move into that. And for me, that happened on September 10th. I had come to Celebrate Recovery with a friend who had said, hey, I'm struggling. And I said, well, let's go together because I'm struggling. And we came down and, David Atterbury saying Jesus paid it all. I came down and I picked up my blue chip. And that's why we celebrate that blue chip so much, is because it is the start of your journey to freedom. And so that was all, 13 and a half years ago. And as I went in and I started realizing that it's okay to talk about my pornography addiction. It's okay to talk about those things that I had been keeping in secret because other guys were doing that in open share. I joined a step study group and I started a deep dive into my own issues and problems. And wow, what an incredible experience it was. But it was a process. That first step study was well over a year. And but God did a miracle in my life. And I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah, that's so good, man. Yeah, I think that, one of the things we learn in the Celebrate Recovery process is denial. And through that lens of lengthening our pain, we kind of developed this false belief that denial will protect us. It'll protect us from the pain. But in reality, it just makes it fester, and we just kind of get riddled with that shame and that guilt. One of those promises from God in Jeremiah 30, verse 17 says, I will give you back your health again and heal your wounds. When you hear those words, God's promise, how have you seen that promise? I mean, just letting that sit in your heart, Eric, to give you back your health again and heal your wounds. What has that meant to you in your journey, bro?
So it's really interesting. I came to Celebrate Recovery to get sobriety. That's what I thought I needed. I thought that would be the answer. But what was really interesting was that really was only a fringe benefit. That was just a side thing that I received from getting closer to God. And of course, one of the acrostics in the denial is the I isolates us from God. And I want to make sure I'm clear. God never leaves me nor forsakes me. He's always right there, but he gives human beings a awesome but horrible power of choice. And I chose to turn my back on God and ignore everything that he was saying to me. I just toned out his voice in my life, and I stayed in denial. It lengthened my pain. But then as I stepped out of denial, I turned back to him. So the relationship, and we talk about peace and serenity. I have serenity now that I have never had for, before recovery. I didn't have that peace and that serenity to make it through my struggles. And so it was just an awesome thing. So I got the side benefit of sobriety. So I'm almost 14 years sober, and that's wonderful. But man, my relationship with God now, also my relationship with others. So it alienated me from others, but now my wife and I are closer than we have ever been before. I am able to talk about my pornography with my youngest daughter, Hadley, and she just turned 20, but her and I talk about my issues, her issues. And so this whole process had just made us closer. So my relationship with God, my relationship with others, and hey, I've got sobriety to boot.
Yeah. That's great, man. And knowing your family, it's that sweet, sweet picture of God's fruit. So, man, just thinking about your story, just back to the practical things. I mean, you immersed yourself in the process, and I think that's so important when I'm thinking about someone that is looking for healing. How can I experience that? Here's some things I know about Eric. You jumped into the full process. You made Friday nights your commitment, right? This is not an option. Maybe Friday nights were something else in the past, but now this is your commitment. Something else I know about you is you saturated your mind and your heart with God's word. You got into those small groups and connected with other men. You found accountability. You found a sponsor. You made the worship time on Friday nights an experience that was a part of your regular life. So, man, why did you do that? What on the backside we see the fruit of that, but what was it that inside of you, just maybe an inspiration for someone that is wanting change, but maybe not fully. Maybe they've got a plan B in their pocket and they haven't fully jumped into plan A, which this is plan A. What was it that was the catalyst for you that made you go all in like that, Eric?
Well, I think seeing other people have freedom and knowing that was even possible. I think the enemy comes in, and at least he did with me, and he would say, you can't have long-term sobriety. Just give in. And I would give in. I'd have guilt and shame. He'd say, see, you're just a failure. And then he would turn it on me. But then I would start having, white knuckling it. And he would do those things. He would say those things to me. But then when I went to Celebrate Recovery, I went to that first open share group, and I heard guys talk about not just being sober for a week or a month or even a year, but multiple years. I was like, that's really possible. And I was like, no, that can't be true. And they were like, it works if you work it. It won't if you don't. I was like, what do you mean work it? And they were talking about getting in a step study. They were talking about going, coming on Friday nights. My wife and I committed to come every Friday night until we finished my step study. And she went through a step study. And we finished that. And I'll never forget, a few years ago, my wife asked me, she said, Eric, do you think you could ever stop going to Celebrate Recovery and, still have your sobriety? And I said, honey, I don't know. I said, I don't know if that's possible or not, but I don't want to find out. I don't want to find out because I have found something that works. And Celebrate Recovery is just a tool. It's my higher power, Jesus Christ. I firmly believe that it's that power. But man, what a powerful tool. I could probably build a house with a rock and nail, but boy, it sure be easier with a hammer. And I will tell you, Celebrate Recovery is a powerful, powerful tool, and it has worked in my life. And I recommend it as much as I possibly can because it does work if you work the process, but you have to be absorbed in the entire thing. And I don't ever want to find out if I don't think I'm cured. I think that I would fall right back into old habits if I left. So I come every Friday night. I go to Open Share every Friday night. I've done 7-step studies. I was planning on doing my 8th one this year. And so I do it because it works and I don't ever want to go back to the way things used to be.
Yeah. And what's beautiful is, you're coming now as primarily you're participating, but you're leading. You're helping other men, the future Erics that walk through that door, and that's what I love. God doesn't waste our hurt. He doesn't waste our past. He gives us purpose in that. Well, Eric, if somebody's listening, and inevitably somebody has shared this, hey, you need to listen to this, and that person is hearing our voices right now, and they are in the middle of it. They're the Eric of 14 years ago, and they've tried everything under their own power, and they want to step out of that denial and step into God's grace and His mercy. What would be some words of encouragement? You're sitting across the table with them, a cup of coffee, and you wanted to share some from your heart, some words that might be the catalyst to move them to make this next step. What would you say to them, Eric?
Well, I would refer back to that story of Bob that I talked to last week, and how he said that God had a plan for my life. God has a plan for your life to prosper you, to give you freedom. He wants you to walk in freedom, closeness with Him and those around you. He desires that for you. But you have a problem. I have a problem. I've got a problem, and until I allow God into that problem, it's called the first step for a reason. Until I take the first step, I can't take step number 2 or step number 3. And I would say, take that first step and don't worry about step number 2. By the way, step number 2 is great, but take that first step and allow God into that area of your life and let Him keep His promise, because He will. He'll keep His promise and He will prosper you. He has a plan for your life, but He wants to get rid of that problem first.
That's so good, man. Well, Eric, I love you, brother. I thank God that He brought you into this space. Even if your goal was sobriety, that's a good goal. But I love that He gave you, and that's the key with freedom, is it's giving us something that to be able to believe in something that we can't even see or imagine and understand. And so whatever gets you through the door is an answer to prayer. But I love that He kind of blesses our socks off, right? With that hope.
Amen, brother.
Well, man, thanks for, as always, I love, I know we could go on a lot longer with this, but I appreciate you making some time, and I know it encouraged our listeners, it encouraged me. Just love you and your family, and thanks for all you do, brother.
I love you, Rodney. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you are as encouraged as I am just hearing Eric's words, and, it is a commitment. And again, is it painful? Is it hard? Yes. But is it worth it? Most definitely. And anytime we hear commitment statements, Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's a strong commitment statement. You know what makes it substantial is through His sacrifice. He went to the cross and He died to put skin on, literally, to put skin on the commitment statement that He makes. And that's what He asks us to do, to be committed. There's no plan B. I'm jumping in with both feet. And then my sacrifice, which may be my time. Maybe I give up my Fridays for this season, whatever that is. Make the commitment, make the sacrifice, and I pray that you will. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. I pray that you'll join us next time. Until then, God bless.